an alternative form of dispute resolution. Just as my previous colleague has mentioned, it is considered conciliatory in the sense that the idea of the Meru community, and generally across many African communities, is that conflict, creates tensions. It breaks relationships, and yet, modernization is coming, yes, but conflicts need to be solved in a way that they are not, in the sense, retributive. Yes, someone has wronged you, but there's a sense in which this structure works to restore this kind of relationships. It values community cohesion, and so the individual is important, but the individual exists in a community. And so when there's conflict, this situation emerges and the community comes together. So this entity is lauded for being public, for being cooperative, and also for being context specific. So to listen to both sides of the disputes, and then at the end of it all, attempt to solve these disputes. So a few findings from this paper. I'm just trying to summarize it. Looking at this case study of the Njuri Ncheke in Meru, Kenya, it actually makes the view of that local wisdom and expertise is important in situations of conflict when it comes to solving questions of land, and which in many African societies land is something sacred, right? It's something that is at the root of our existence. So scholars who work on debates such as autochthony, the likes of Nyamjo and others, will argue that the soil or land has a form of identity. It is it gives us a sense of belonging. So wherever there are conflicts, we need that kind of wisdom. If you could just stay back to the previous slide. So there's a sense of wanting to build onto that expertise. Leaders selected to this council are people who carry with them community history and context. And then the other standout from the paper is the value of transparency and accountability. So it holds its meeting in the open, it's public, it's accountable. They will listen to both sides and come to a conclusion. And then, as I've mentioned before, it was also focused on the notions of restorative justice. It is concerned with repairing this relationship. Yes, we've been in conflict situation, but then how do you restore the situation after that? One other sort of approach that they use is the use of rituals. So there's a sense of religion and spirituality in how they deal with conflicts such as land and related land use. So the rituals here are in the sense of oath taking. So, for example, if a member, if a conflict party is appearing at this court, as it were, the Supreme Court of the community, then they would have to swear in some ways that what they will tell is the truth. And if they don't tell the truth, that then there are some consequences that can follow, their family. So it's not just an individual thing, but also can follow their family members. So that is sort of like a safeguard for individuals to be very truthful. And also the elders take the oath as well to be transparent and accountable. So this reduces, of course, the other layers of things like corruption that would appear in formal legal systems and so on. So in conclusion, I'm just trying to say that the lessons we can really pick from this community is that tradition can exist with modernity, right? That indigenous institutions, this institution is traced to as early as the 17th century. It survived the colonial times as well, and in the post-independence period. And it has continued to be, an arbiter of conflicts across the community. But yes, there are a few challenges that are emerging. Of course, as societies modernize, younger people seem to neglect this indigenous mechanism, but also the elite. As people get a little educated or more educated, they begin to sort of, move towards very more formal dispute resolution mechanisms. But at the end, the lesson we can pick from the Njuri Ncheke is that conflict resolution is possible from the ground. It's, we can always go back to the indigenous mechanisms because they're effective. If you were to go to a formal court system, it takes a longer time, it is likely to be costly, and then the justice rendered is likely to be very retributive. So it's like a winner-take-all kind of system. But these approaches allow, conflict parties to come together and find a resolution, and in that way restore relationships. So it's becoming much more important, especially in the post-2010 Kenya constitution. I think Article 159.2, I believe, values alternative dispute resolution. So it's a way also to clear the backlog that appears in formal justice. So in conclusion, I'm just making a case that we can learn a lot from indigenous conflict mechanisms. And this is just a little case from Meru in Kenya, but there are many examples across the continent. The Ubuntus, the Matoputo of this world, who are very focused on addressing conflicts from below, but in a very restorative manner. I thank you.
Thank you for that. So the next presenter is Benezet, and Benezet's presentation is on Maasai ethno-politics and institutional literacy towards functional peace building.
Yes, well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think for the sake of peace, which is the theme of our meeting, I do not want to do any PowerPoint slides to displace others, as my brother here just did. So I can come back. They're all sorted. I'm trying to follow suit by the boutique when not protecting. Well, I'm talking to you today about the Maasai. And those of you who came via Dar es Salaam International Airport, I believe you saw this very beautiful painting at the airport as you wait for your luggages. But then what they portray there and what we are seeing on the ground in the country, I think we have all heard of the displacement from Ngorongoro and other parts of the country in the name of conservation and modernity, etc. So my talk today is more or less about how the Maasai, who have been portrayed and framed as being violent, conflict-loving, irrational, backward, etc., are engaging with the state, not just in trying to avoid or resist, but rather to build functional peace. Now, if you go back into history, I think we'll all agree with me that Africans generally were constructed as a catalog of deficits, lacking in all these kinds of things. But I think the pastoralists bore the biggest part of the brand as being seen more volatile, more violent, less rational, like the lists of the population. And even in the sense of land use allocation during the colonial period, pastoralists were given the least favorable lands, and they were the last to be accommodated. I think sadly the post-colonial state inherited that colonial thinking, and in a way it has perfected it, in the sense what is happening now and what happened in the colonial period, there's a very small distinction in how they perceive and see pastoralists. If I take Tanzania, I think, which I'm looking at, the Maasai Tanzania, some 2 years ago, we had a serious water shortage with load shedding, electricity shedding, and one of the political leaders, I wouldn't want to mention who, said we are experiencing that problem because we have a big number of cattle that drink a lot of water, and therefore the rivers are drying. And she gave number, I've just said she, given out who it is, that they drink almost like one cattle drink 40 liters a day. We have more than 30 million, so if you multiply that times every day, then you'll see that the rivers will dry up. And then we have our livestock policy of Tanzania of 2006. We'd expect the livestock policy to see livestock as the main asset, and therefore create a tone that shows they want to invest in that. But the policy, they have used, I think, words like pastoralists, including the Maasai, as conflict lovers, invaders, environmental degraders, unproductive, irrational, etc. So I think the Maasai, and I was saying, of course, with this picture here, at the airport, they'll present this image for the sake of tourism and getting money and resources in creating a certain image. But then when you go to Ngorongoro, they'll say, this is not what we want you to do. You're building too many houses. When you go to other areas where the Maasai stay, they'll tell them, no, this is not how it should be. Build modern houses. So modernity in this context is very fluid. If it's an area where there's tourism, then we don't want it to be modern. Retain tradition for the sake of the income. When it's other areas, then they'll tell them, this is too traditional. Maasai, you should change. Build iron roofed houses, do 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I think the main challenge here has been the way in which the colonial thinking, which has reduced these people, and how the Maasai now are challenging that. The key concern has been the use of land. How should land be used with priority over sedentary life, mobility being seen as irrational, and challenging the status quo. So in a bit of trying to maintain their Maasaihood and their traditions and culture and customs, they are challenging this idea of development. And this is where I try to allocate the study with the Pan-African idea of looking at their dignity, looking at their freedoms, and of course, changing the discourse surrounding them. And the question would be, does pastoralism mean being anti-development? Does mobility mean being anti-modernity? Should land use be limited to only sedentary as a priority? And if you move, then you're becoming anti-development. Now, the case of the Maasai in Kiteto, where I spent some few years doing my fieldwork, showed me that they are now, in the past, they would evade the state and go to more remote areas to avoid confrontation. But I think now they have come to run out of space to evade the state. And therefore, in building peace, they're engaging more with the state. One of the things they're doing, like in Kiteto, they have become integral part of the economy. And therefore, sometimes when the state uses muscles to try and force them, they'll strike and pull off from the local markets. And if they do that for a month or two, then the local economy, the district economy will crumble. And there's one case in Vomero where last year, yes, they demanded the removal of a district police commissioner. And when they met them, when they gave their demands and they're not met, they stopped going to the markets. And then after the fourth weekend, then the district commissioner had to change the district police commander. And therefore, in that way, by lodging the politics of threat and linking with the institutions, they are creating a system where the government will work with them in a way that does not use confrontation. But secondly, they're also doing what is very important. During the colonial period, one idea that came was forests should not be spaces of grazing. Livestock should not go and eat in the forests. But then the Maasai depend on that space. In a bit, one way is to go and feed their livestock, but also it's important to avoid conflicts with the farming communities. Because if they go and graze in the farms, then there'll be fights and killings, etc. So in a bid to change that, they began grazing in that area. Although the institutional, in terms of the Forest Act does not allow grazing in those forests, in those spaces. But the Maasai in those areas have created their own settings based on the gaps in the law, and they have made grazing in those forest spaces as legal in the areas. And therefore, they are experiencing less conflicts in those areas and better relationships with the non-pastoral communities. But again, they're also building stable relationships with the non-pastoral communities in the sense of allowing them to, because they have very big pastoral lands, they allow them to cultivate in those areas. And then the Maasai will go and graze in the post-harvest remains. So you cultivate freely on my land, but then after you harvest, my livestock will come and feed in that area. And therefore, how they relate even in the markets, there will be a very small distinction between those two. Now, comparing with other areas where they don't have such kinds of mechanisms, like in Kigoma, where a different group of pastoral community exists, there have been more and more recurrent conflicts between the Maasai and the state, the Maasai and the police, the Maasai and the villagers, etc. Unfortunately, one of my key informants, who was a district forest officer in Kigoma, was killed last year by a group of pastoralists in the forest. So they had used force and evicted them. When they went to survey the forest again, the pastoralists went back and killed 3 of them. So in a way, it's creating more and more tensions between the two and creating more problems. Now, what are we learning from the Maasai case and the state relations? I think it's the important thing to decolonize the whole idea of development and decolonize our relationship with land. In the sense that the way the state classifies and identifies the Maasai or pastoralists is a recipe for more disasters and more conflicts. If we reclassify these people and we redefine the uses of land and not putting limits to movement as being undevelopmental, then we could create more peaceful communities that accommodate indigenous and traditional ways of life. Asanteni sana.
So thank you, Benezet. So Edwin is the next presenter and his title is there, so I don't have to introduce it.
Yes, mine is different because I'm coming from a veterinary medicine background. But currently I'm doing research in rural development, especially on ICT and rural life, climate change and transition, and natural resource conflicts and peace building. So because I'm coming from natural science, so I'll show you some figures. African, particular sub-Saharan region, this has been, we know, the hotspot for conflicts, including civil wars, interstate and ethnic wars. And we had various strategic tactics on the ground to mitigate these conflicts and make peace. But conflict continued to shadow this region. Yeah, you can name various countries that we are having these problems. But also, scholar research on peace and conflicts, this has significantly increased now. And these scholars, they publish the ranges from political ecology, from climate change and natural resources, and also from sociology and economics. But also the call to eliminate these colonial practices in the knowledge production. This has also gained momentum to elevate the contribution of scholars from the global south. For instance, Mabele, they reveal the overwhelming dominance of scholars from the global north that are shaping the knowledge production and prioritizing the Eurocentric narratives. Scholars in peace and conflict scholarship, they also call for decolonizing the knowledge production and dissemination as a solution to eradicate the Eurocentric narratives and the thinking on the issues concerning the global south. So despite all these evidence of colonial legacy and these asymmetrical power in the peace studies, the impact on the visibility of indigenous knowledge and philosophies, these remain understudied. So my draft papers employ this quantitative approach to examine how the colonial practices and power dynamics impede the integration of indigenous knowledge in the African peace studies, because I thought that understanding of these barriers, these are vital for developing sustainable context-specific peace-building solutions, but also will increase the visibility and integration of indigenous knowledge in the African peace studies to enrich the contemporary debate. So in terms of material and methods, I extract the bibliographic data from the Web of Science. I use the various key terms. So these were the key terms I used, but I excluded the review papers and the books, and I retained 4 Web of Science subject categories. These, they ranges from international relations, political science, area studies, and laws. These I thought were the relevant to the subject matter. But in all these disciplines, international relations had more articles, and the SAGE retrieved 504 articles, of which I exported them to the text file format for doing the bibliometric analysis, where I utilized the BiblioShine Time application with bibliometrics package in ARA software. And these tools enable bibliometric analysis and visualization, which including this source analysis, author analysis, citation analysis, visualization of the keyword concurrency network and research collaboration networks. And 2 key indicators, that publication count and total citations, these were employed to assess the journal and author productivity and impact. But additionally, the total citation, these were saved as an objective metric to gauge the impact and relevance of scientific publications. So the analysis also involved examining the research collaborations at 3 levels, at authors level, institutions and countries, and identify the major research themes using the key search words. So moreover, I assessed whether highly cited articles address the indigenous knowledge and philosophies by searching for specific terms such as Ubuntu and indigenous knowledge. And additionally, I investigated whether the top journals in Africa peace studies, they published articles on indigenous knowledge and if such topics were included in the journal scope statements. So in terms of the results, the trends of the peace building study from 1968 up to 20, this is the trend. So the African peace studies, they show an increasing trend from 1968 to 2023. And the skyrocketing publication is seen in 2010 onwards, this one. But however, in 2022 and 2023, there is downward trend. So I suspected this could be partly attributed by COVID-19 pandemic, which affected research productivities globally. And in terms of the top trends, most productive journals on the African peace studies, top trends, the Journal of Conflict Resolution, this is first, followed by the African Journal on Conflict Resolution. This is an African-based, and conflict management and peace. These were the third. So these were the range between 1971 to the L 2024. But we have African Journal on Conflict Resolution ranging among the top productive, the second. But if you see on the top high-cited journals on African peace studies, despite that journal being the second in the highly productive journal on peace studies in Africa, it does not appear in the top 20 high-cited journal. We have the number one Journal of Conflict Resolution, Journal of Peace Research, followed by Journal of Conflict Management, and the rest. So the Journal of Conflict Resolution, as I say, this is cited as among the top productive journals of the peace and conflict research studies. And in terms of the top 20 highly productive authors, Alad Dusma is the most productive author in the African peace studies, followed by Alexander Dijuan. These both scholars, they are coming from the Western European institutions. We have only 4 Africans that makes 20%. Femi Olukasan. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So we have Johnny Olukasan there, Adebayo, and Aduda. These are coming from Nigeria, and this one is coming from Adumasa Akoko is coming from Ethiopia. So these were the top productive authors.
What about Anand?
So this shows, no, it's not yet. So this shows that how Northern scholars, they dominate productivity in the African peace studies. And in terms of the top 20 highly cited authors in African peace studies, the late Robert Gu and Keith Rogers, these are highly cited authors in African peace studies. These two, they highly cited authors, and only one African scholar appeared. This is Ibrahim El Badawi. Appears. This is a Sudanese scholar trained in economics and in statistics at the Northern Carolina States in USA. He served as the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning in Sudan from 1990 to 2020. So therefore, the Northern scholars from USA and the Western Europe, they dominate the African peace studies. And in terms of the top 20 most productive institutions, University of London is the leading productive institutions for African peace studies, followed by Peace Research Institute, Oslo, PREA, and Uppsala universities. So overall, 90% they're coming from the global north, USA and Western Europe, European countries. So only 2 African-based institutions, that is the University of Nigeria and the University of Witwatersrand, these appear in the top 20 productive institutions. And the most influential papers in African peace studies, these are the most top 20 influential papers. They are all from if you talk in terms of journal productivity, the Journal of Conflict Resolution is leading. It appears 14 times in the top 20, so representing 70%. And also, in terms of authorship, these are dominated by the northern scholars. So we lack representation of the scholars from the global south in authorship, even though the articles, they tell the stories from the global south. So this shows that we have presence of colonial science in the African peace studies. But also none of the top 20 articles, they highlight indigenous knowledge and philosophy related to peace building. So this suggests exclusion of indigenous perspectives from the contemporary debate in the African peace studies. And in terms of the word clouds that are used for analysis, the top 5 themes on peace studies, they are conflict resolution, conflict management, and peace building, conflict and civil wars. The indigenous knowledge appear, but with a very low resolution, this one, low frequency. So therefore, this provides a signal on the invisibility of indigenous knowledge in the peace studies. So therefore, indigenous knowledge remain to be understudies research in Africa peace studies. And in terms of author collaborations, research collaboration is highly disconnected, suggesting a well-established from the northern scholars, these ones. And this increases the northern scholars' centrality scores in terms of betweenness and closeness and centrality compared to the African scholars. And in terms of institutional level collaborations, we see institutions somewhat disconnected bias. We can see disconnected click between the University of Cape Town and Witwatersrand. So they don't collaborate with other institutions in Africa. They only collaborate here. So the northern institutions, they dominate in the collaboration in peace and conflict studies, but also in the Western Europe, peace and research, the PREA, Peace Research Institute, Oslo in Norway, is very highly influential in the peace and conflict studies. So the PREA hosts the Journal of Peace Research, the highly productive journal, which publishes the top articles on African peace and conflict studies. So therefore, in USA also we see New York University is highly connected there. So this is likely due to research centers that are dedicated to African affairs. They host the African House at the New York University that conduct research on the political, economic, disconnected.
The computer is telling you time is up.
I'm finalizing. Okay. Yes, okay. So in terms of country level research collaborations, we see the northern countries, USA and the Western European countries, they collaborate more on African peace and conflict studies. In Africa, only Nigeria and South Africa, they are strongly collaborate on peace studies. And weak research collaboration among the Africans, this could be partly attributed by inadequate local research funds. And USA and UK, these are the leading countries with a large number of research collaboration ties. So these analyses, we see the dominance of scholars from the global north, the USA. So as a result, they undermine the role of and contribution of the local and indigenous knowledge and philosophy, such as the root for building peace. So therefore, the colonization of knowledge production, I thought this is crucial to rectify this very structural problem, promote local and indigenous ideas and thinking to build peace, because analysis of the top 20 influential and articles on African peace, they suggest that indigenous knowledge and philosophies are not central debates, discourses of the African peace studies. For instance, the top 3 journals, the Journal of Conflict Resolution, Journal of Peace Research, and Conflict Management and Peace Science, they do not include indigenous knowledge and philosophies in the journal scope, and none they publish paper relating to indigenous knowledge or peace building. So this affects the visibility and the discussion of indigenous knowledge and philosophy. Therefore, indigenous knowledge and philosophy are not among the trending research themes. And in terms of collaboration, we see weak collaboration among the African states. These studies, they show that global North-South collaboration are featured by asymmetric power relations. So therefore, I suggest some practical recommendations to improve the status quo. First, the indigenous knowledge and philosophy, such as Ubuntu, should be promoted and integrated in the current debate of peace studies in Africa. And second, the top journals in peace studies should promote publications on indigenous knowledge and philosophy to encourage authors to gain interest to such important topic. And thirdly, mutual and symmetric power relation in research collaboration promoted to ensure marginalized partners they gain power to influence research ideas and agenda to promote local-driven research ideas. So currently, in my drafts, I'm working on analyzing the composition of editorial member in these top journals to see whether they perpetuate the same research narratives. Thank you.
That was excellent. Thank you, Edwin, as much as you've stolen some part of our time, but thank you for highlighting that. We need all of that. So as I said, I'm going to wrap our session by making a short presentation. And I want to pick from where our keynote speakers, Ms. Butiku and Professor Issa left. They did start. I want to speak on Ubuntuism. And the title of my presentation is, I am because we are, question mark. I am questioning the I am because we are. Ubuntuism, ethnic conflicts, and the crisis of identity in Africa. So what I want to speak to is what I see as challenges and ironies of talking about Ubuntu as a unifying worldview for the different ethnic communities in Africa to live as one in the midst of recurrent ethnic conflicts in various countries in Africa, Kenya included, that I see as some form of identity crisis in Africa. So what I'm saying is, although Ubuntu is a form of resistance against Western-oriented philosophy on human identity, because it focuses on communality, communism, humanism, in contrast to individualism, and can therefore be used to forge a new African identity based on the decolonized consciousness for Africans to live in the true spirit of Ubuntu, which has been captured variously as I am because we are, your pain is my pain, my wealth is your wealth, your salvation is my salvation, that it is through others that one attains selfhood, an injury to one is an injury to all, etc. As much as if we live that, if we claim that we live that, what I'm asking is, so why do we have ethnic conflicts? Why do we have ethnic communities like in Kenya and wherever else rising against one another? Why do we have xenophobia? If indeed I am because we are. So I'm saying that as much as this is the noble, ideal conception of Ubuntu, and the keynote speakers were also, about Ujamaa and all, in reality, in my view, why I think that this is the case and why I see these contradictions is because it appears that this oneness is narrowly interpreted to mean members of one's ethnic community or of one's nationality. Hence, the several cases of profiling of insiders and outsiders in inter-ethnic conflicts or in xenophobic attacks. So then I'm asking, what constitutes African identity? Who is an African? When we are talking about this oneness, when we are talking about this we-ness, and what is the place of ethnic identity in defining Africanness? Which I believe, if we were able to answer these questions, and which I believe are the core, some of the core philosophical questions at the conception or at the base of Ubuntu philosophy, then we would be able to resolve inter-ethnic conflicts. So I'm asking, so I'm not saying that Ubuntu has failed. I'm not saying that, I'm not criticizing it and saying that it's just an ideal that cannot be applied. But what I'm asking is, when I pose these questions, I don't have the answers. I'm just provoking all of us to think about it. I'm asking, how can Ubuntu be used as an indigenous? How can we actually live Ubuntu? So that it becomes an indigenous peace-building strategy to foster a sense of oneness, a sense of we-ness, a sense of Africanness that can then help us, in my view, to resolve this. And what stands in the way of actualizing Ubuntu in our everyday life in Africa? Why do we still have all of these, years after the proclamation of Ujamaa and Ubuntu? Why do we still have these, not, in my view, where is this human interconnectedness that Ubuntu professes? And as I said, the keynotes, touched on what I want to speak, what I'm speaking to. And when Butiku asked us, told us, look at your neighbor, what do you see? And then we were all telling him, I see this, I see this. Then at the base of it, it is that I see a human being. True. I see, we don't see cats. He asked us, did you see a cat? Did you see a chicken? No, I don't. So when I look, I see a human being. But then the question to me is, what sort of human being do you see? Because then, if indeed, when I look, those people who are involved in inter-ethnic communities, when we have xenophobic attacks, is it really true? Can we really say that when they look, I am Komba, I am from the Komba community, he is from the Kikuyu community. If I am fighting him because he is Kikuyu, when I look at him, do I really see a human being in the sense of me? Because that is what Butiku was saying, that, you see, period. You're just seeing a human being, and I am a human being. Is that the case really? Or is it that when we look through, we see human beings, but then the critical question is, what sort of human being do I see? Do I see a less valuable human being than I am? Who deserves to be killed? And the reason why I'm saying that is because we've had cases in Kenya during the Rwanda genocide. Have we not had the propagators of such using inhumane terms to refer to other human beings in Kenya, even as we speak, even when we do not have ethnic clashes? And I keep using this. John is going to pardon me because he's part of, but we do have communities from the eastern region of Kenya who regard, not within the context of any strife, they regard, some, not all of them, but when it is invoked, then it is negative. But then they call them, John would help me to pronounce it correctly, but the translation is, John, now you can use the local, animals from the West. You know that term? You know that expression? So then, if we do have some members of some ethnic communities in Kenya who regard other members of other ethnic communities from the western part of Kenya as animals from the west. Is it really true that when they look at those guys, they see human beings? And even if they do see human beings, what sort of human beings do they see? And to me, it is that is at the base of why it is ironical, probably hypocritical, for us to talk about and to profess and to preach this oneness that underlies the Ubuntu Ujamaa, whereas we are still involved in that. So then, as I finish, what I'm asking is, and what I'm posing to all of us is, where is this oneness? If we went out today to look for it, where would we find it? Especially within the context of those warring communities where members of one community rise and kill members of another community, where members of one nationality regard members of another nationality as outsiders. So then we still have we against them. So when we are talking about Ubuntu and we-ness and oneness, and that I am because we are, and that, you know, I can only realize my humanity through the humanity of other people, how broad is this conception of we-ness? Is it really in the way that it is envisioned, was envisioned by those, I mean, the fathers of these philosophies? So thank you. So I think we are doing still well. So now we are going to invite, so that is the end of our presentations. So now we are going to invite reactions from the audience for the 5 presentations. For the next, yeah, we have time. The next session is 5:30, so we have 20 minutes at least for that. So yes, so yeah.
Thank you for the interest of time. I will speak only the 2 last speakers. I congratulate all of you for the presentation. I have 2 things. One, that the journals, the papers, the authors, institutions, and research are dominated by the North. Maybe one question is, can we learn from the North? Or we have nothing to learn from the North? And 2, is it possible that maybe our findings, our research, our documentations are in hard copies somewhere in our archives in Africa, where we cannot trace them online? Can we now trace that possibility? And the other thing is about the last speaker. Where is oneness? I was also asking myself about that. Africa has more than 54 states. In these states, we are talking more than 60 years of independence. And we call ourselves independent. So the question is, who is oppressing us? If we are talking about Pan-Africanism, oneness, why are we not one? who is oppressing us? Are we not seeing in our continent that we torture our own people? The independent states, we torture our own people. We interfere our own elections. We stay longer, we change constitutions. We steal elections. We torture our opponents. Who is oppressing us? Ubuntu. Is that Ubuntu? Who are these people who call them Africans? Are we not the same people who are doing all these evil to our own people? Thank you for the interest of time.
Just a quick announcement. They're about to close off the tea. If anybody wants tea, then maybe all any beverages.
Take a call.
Thank you. Jacinta, you said you wanted to provoke us, and I felt that, so I wanted to perhaps respond. And so you asked where's Ubuntu and why is it so kind of invisible if we invoking it so much in a space like this? And I wondered whether part of the answer is not in that we haven't given enough attention to all the systems and century-old systems that have kind of dismantled Ubuntu. And I'm thinking here about long periods of slavery, colonization in my own country, apartheid, and all the other kinds, and the ongoing structural violence that continuously affects families, communities who are living very precarious and vulnerable and competitive kinds of livelihoods and can't find the space to express Ubuntu. And I think that and the kinds of trauma that goes with the levels of brutal oppression and dehumanization, that perhaps in that mix is some of the answer why we can't really harness this whole tradition that served the continent so well.
I like that the way you put it, because I have a similar question to Jacinta, that we realize this as a challenge, but we still continue to ask the same kind of question. When you look at our curriculum or the way we teach, how much of Ubuntu do we have in training our leaders or in living the real life? Now, Edwin, you presented a very gloomy picture of indigenous knowledge production. At the same time, you recommend that we mainstream indigenous knowledge in the same journals that have ignored this. How do you think how will that be possible? Are you considering alternative ways to do that? In terms of, what was the other one, John, ADR has its own weaknesses, just like our legal systems. Now we live in a dual legal system, and if they were all value-based, we would be able to solve a number of the challenges that you talk about. Where do you see the convergence, the meeting point? And you're giving a sample for a particular community. Would that be applicable to a different community? And finally, to Charles, very similar to what John presented. Indigenous knowledge, you give it a very high, sounding like, just like Ubuntu is very good, but it has so many failures. Some people have actually argued for hybrid peace to come to deal with the two, because these are structural issues and you need to address both of them. What conditions need to be in place for that those indigenous practices to be effective?
Thank you so much. I like standing. Coming from that background of a teacher, I always like standing. Thank you very much for your lovely presentation and so on. For me, I don't have any question, but it's just an observation. As scholars, academicians, we have been doing a lot of these presentations and so on issues affecting us. But we leave one thing, and until we bring that thing on board, then we are going to move forward. What am I saying here? Like what we are talking about, Ubuntu, Pan-Africanism, etc. It's very cardinal. But we leave out key players, the people who can make decisions and change. I mean, maybe politicians, or maybe a mayor or a city who can get in touch with any top officials, government officials, and say, these are the things that we are going through. And these are the people who can help us, through policies and so on, to change and give us whatever we want. Otherwise, we'll still be talking. And then it comes a Sunday or Saturday, we go. And we wait for the next, I don't know, conference and so on. Meanwhile, our issues are still going on and affecting us. I think it's time for us now to start bringing the stakeholders. When we're having such presentation and so on, at least one or two who can communicate and so on, so that at least we can move forward. Thank you.
Last question. Thank you very much. I'm Father Stephen from Nairobi, Vice Chancellor, Catholic University of Eastern Africa. I enjoyed the presentations, but then I had somebody talk about utopia. And I think that's really critical, that your subscriptions were pretty good and how that it should continue. But then maybe the methodology of inculcating it to the youth, because they see this as archaic knowledge. When I tell my students, we never used to wear shoes as young people, they think I'm a liar. And therefore, it would be nice to create, I think, the community so that these recommendations need to go down to the communities to where it really belongs, because that's where they are manipulated. And number two, how do we break this chain of dynasties? We are now having dynasties. I was surprised to see when Israel is trying to pass a law where the president has unlimited terms. I think you have seen that. And the people have been demonstrating in Israel. It has happened in some of these countries. As we are talking about now getting into this liberation, actually the systems are doing the opposite. They are changing laws in favor of them. I think somebody has said that. And therefore, now, even in Kenya, I fear that we are going that fast, extremely fast. And therefore, I'm sure Tanzania will pick, Uganda did, Rwanda did, and many other countries. I think it is good that we start engaging and letting the public know. So how are you going to do it? Because I'm sure you have better public connection with the academicians, especially when we go for research.
Yeah, just a comment. I think the last speaker was asking very serious questions. They say, who are these people? And my question is, who are you? No, it's not laughing. If you don't realize who you are, very difficult to realize who you are. This point number one. What do we share? Who are you talking about? And what is it you want to share with whom? If you don't know who you are and you're asking the question, so what do you want to share and want to share it with whom? It's a very serious question. The last one, What do you see in ourselves? What do you see in yourself? You see, who are these we? Isn't this me and you and us here? So what is it that we see? You see, if we don't bring this question to the individual, and then individuals will never be able to solve these problems. You keep on talking about Kikuyu. Kikuyu is a group, but it's made up of individuals. Each Kikuyu. What does the Kikuyu, one Kikuyu, the me Kikuyu, think about the Embu? Thank you.
Madam Moderator, should I bring the mic? I see two hands, and the time. Do we?
Yes, of course.
I just have I just want to, can everyone hear me in the room? I'm going to keep it very brief. I just have a comment about all of the presenters. I found it very engaging. It really triggered my nerd bells in my head. It was absolutely great. But what I wanted to just make comments on about these presentations is making the connections to what you're speaking about, researching and studying, and what the Black experience is in the United States. So starting with Ben, when you work with the Maasai people and talked about decolonization, that is a very strong subject in the United States because many activists, student organizations, and the masses of people understand that Black people, and everybody for that matter, are sitting on unceded territory. So when we talk about dismantling systems and facing off with the state, the way you described the Maasai people having to do in order to survive and deal with life and land the way they want to do it, is the same thing that happens in the United States with the Indigenous people and as well as Black people. So I found that absolutely excellent. And decolonization is something that is very, very important. John, I was listening to your part about ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, and I wanted to give you a little foreshadowing and also tie it up in a bow with what some of the other people spoke about, especially about the NGOs. What we saw happen in the United States is alternative dispute resolution was happening on a community level in a very organic way. People were getting together and resolving their disputes within community and within small grassroots organizations. But once colonizers, the state, fill in the blank, began to see particularly youth resolve problems on their own and not escalate conflict, we also call them NGOs, but in the United States, we call it nonprofits, the nonprofit industrial complex, because it is an industry. They came in and they worked with state government to take over alternative dispute resolution. So what you have now is people are less reluctant to participate in those programs because they are part of the surveillance state. So if that's any foreshadowing of what you continue to research and work on and work in community, ensure that they understand as a principle of unity that these dispute resolution programming could never belong to the state. Edwin, I almost died. It was great. It was something that we already know, right? I already know these journals are racist. I used to work for a book publisher, so I know that. We already know that. But what was also very interesting to me is when you marked off the different particular institutions that were involved in that erasure of African peace studies. It included Columbia and NYU. And right now in 2024, someone else brought up Palestine and Gaza and Israel, etc. Certain elite institutions that put out certain academic works that erase Indigenous people, erase Black people, also at the same time build this contradiction and hold themselves out to be the vanguard of movements and movement organizations, but it's total BS because they're in these institutions that are preparing them for elite society, right? So this is just an exercise, while at the same time, you're benefiting from erasing African people, and it happens in different modalities. So when you brought out your research about African peace studies and the way it's being exploited and erased in that Eurocentric context, that just added, another couple of sprinkles on the cake that we know to be racism. So as we have this conference, for the next couple of days, I think that exercise for us is not just to say what we're going to say, but make those connections across the diaspora. How are these things manifesting in different places, but in the same way, so we know about it? So when you figured out that NYU and Columbia are erasing Indigenous work, that's when you call us on the phone, because we're over there. We will step to these institutions and say that paper has to be removed because it's racist. We have to be connected in that way, so we work together to solve each other's problems. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. My question is actually to the last speaker. It was very clear from the presentation that much of the countries, particularly US and UK and other countries in Europe, they have heavily invested in research. And in Africa, I think it's only Nigeria and South Africa that are doing their best. Now, this is a very big shame, because out of 54 countries in Africa, only 2 are taking research serious. This is a very big problem that I'm seeing already. So my question is, have you taken time to analyze what could be the problem? That why most African countries not taking research serious, not investing, not even allocating enough resources to invest on peace education research? What could be that reason? Because there is nothing we can do about US and Europe investing in research. That's their money, But the problem is why our African governments are not allocating resources for research. That's the point I'm trying to bring forward here. Thank you.
We have someone who needs to ask a question that will be 2 seconds long.
Just, I know you all are academics, I am too, so I'm wondering how you're navigating also SSRC and like maybe potential top-down peace kind of mandates through that and programming and things like that. Wondering how you're navigating that academically to do your work and also. So.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got exactly. We are navigating what and what? No.
Navigating the notion of peace as potential top-down from like the North or global North, and trying to do more research on that and build programs on that. How are you navigating that potentially?
Connecting into the SSRC?
Yes.
It is the North
funding the fellowships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure all of this, and they will have a better, they may have a better answer than me, but what I would say is that the rationale, the rationale for SSRC, that particular program for SSRC, is to enhance the feasibility. So they don't dictate the terms. It is about enhancing the feasibility of African scholars based in Africa. So it's like some sort of empowerment for them. So you guys survey, see what are the peace conflict issues around you, come up with proposals, and then we fund you to research and to disseminate. Like, dissemination is like sponsoring you to attend conferences like they did here. So since it is, the Africanist, we can use that. So then, as much as the money is from the North, but then it is for a good cause that it is supposed to enable. So I want to I don't think that what was posed to me were really questions. I think that people were just, apart from the last one, and it wasn't even, so John said that he's thinking that probably the reason why we are not seeing this Ubuntu in action is probably, maybe if I got him right, is because maybe the environment is not right. There are so many competing issues and historical, structural, like he mentioned about the histories of these different. Although, and then whether we see it lived out, whether it is in the different sectors, whether it is in education and all of that, and that ties to what he asked, like for instance, in school, how much Ubuntu do we? And I would say that true, probably it hasn't been mainstreamed. I don't know, is it Matt who said that it is not about whether Ujamaa or Ubuntu failed, it's about was it even tried? So are we actually living out? I mean, are we living Ubuntu actually, or is it just lip service that we pay to it? Then Butiku, I wasn't laughing because they were not serious questions. I was laughing because of the deep philosophical implication of those questions. Because when you, who are you? And that is exactly. I mean, we are saying the same thing. I hope, because that is the implication of your questions is exactly what I'm saying. That if indeed, like you did in the morning, if I, as an individual, I looked at him as a reflection of me, then there would be no conflict. Then you're asking, what do I want to share? So if it starts from I, then it would work. And I was asking why has it not worked? And I'm getting the answers in what is implied in your questions, because we are not living it, so that when I look at another human being, regardless of gender, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, what I'm supposed to see is a human being. And if we define humaneness, what it means to be human, then all of these other biases cease to exist, cease to matter. And that way, then, that is the only way that we, human beings, Africans, and every other, I didn't bring the issue of critiquing and asking, is Ubuntu uniquely African, or is it about humanity, regardless of whether you are African or whether you are European or whatever it is? Because to me, it is about humanity, not African. So it is not about it being, there is nothing uniquely African about being human, the way you put it. And I think that is the way that it would work. So thank you for raising those questions.
Yeah, thank you. I have questions from George that he was asking, can we learn from the North? Our researchers are in hard copy and not online, but also from the CHARS, how will that be possible, the solution that I'm proposing? Anyway, I don't have direct answers, but what I believe, knowledge creation is socially built, but sadly, we have these power imbalances in academia between the North and the South, the global North and the South. We lack this diverse epistemology in our own Afrocentric, but also we have this distortion of our historical narratives in the academia. But to me, all this led to marginalization of these indigenous knowledge systems, but also the alternative ways of understanding the world. So in my paper, I argue for epistemical decolonization to eliminate these coloniality practices in knowledge production, but also to end the cycle of these intellectual dependency, the stereotypes that we are having. Maybe what we could do, we could reform our education curricula. We could have this equitable system of partnership in terms of knowledge production and others. I'm not very sure. We can keep on talking about this. But what could be the problem in Africa not investing in research? I think this is the question for all of us. It's not my question to respond to. Maybe we can dialogue until the end of this conference. Yeah. It's a good question. I appreciate it.
Involve policymakers. They will help us.
Thank you very much. Mine was one, but just to respond to two questions. One was addressed to Benny. I think it was on who is oppressing us, because I touched it in my paper, and I look at two scenarios. One on the colonial systems, and the other one is on the product of the colonial systems. And as we are struggling, as we are advocating for the organization of knowledge, I think we also need to look at the politicization of the same knowledge, because we've had some cases, a lot of cases, especially here in Tanzania, where we have a lot of scholars advocating for issues like indigenous peacebuilding approaches and other some relevant issues, but by the time they are appointed to political positions, they end up doing the opposite of what they've been talking all those years of their service in academic institutions. My friend here, I normally call him Prof. Ben, talked a lot about the Maasai people being perceived as anti-development and all that. But I'm trying to imagine by the time the same Ben is appointed as a minister for natural resources, what is he going to do with regards to the Maasai issues? Right. So I think we need to look at the politicization of the same knowledge as we are advocating for the colonization of knowledge. And the other thing was on the my brother talked about the whether the advantages of indigenous peace-building approach vis-a-vis the conventional peace-building approaches. I agree with him on the, let's say, the possibility to look at the hybrid. And if you look at those who are advocating for indigenous peace-building approaches, they are saying these conventional peace-building approaches have been in place for years. We have witnessed a number of peace accords being signed in Kampala, in Maputo, in Nairobi, and elsewhere. But why is it that the challenges are still there? The African continent is still facing these violent conflicts. That's why the proponents of the indigenous peace-building approach, they are saying, maybe it's not because the conventional peace-building approaches are state-centric and then these ones are people-centered, but perhaps the conventional peace-building approaches have failed to address the root causes of all of those challenges. The African continent is still facing the issues to do with marginalization, poverty and inequality. The gap between those who have and those who have not is still increasing from day to day. And with these conventional peace approaches, they normally end up considering the interest of those few at the top. That's why my brother from South Sudan, you can bear witness here that sometimes they just end up giving these political posts to those at the top. So you'll be the president, and then will be the vice president, and then the rest will be taken on board in the cabinet. What about those at the villages there? Their issues are still there. How are they going to be addressed? So I think the proponents of indigenous peace building, they are advocating for it because it's the only approach that has the possibility to address the root causes. But I agree with my brother there, I think from Zambia, that as we are looking for an hybrid approach, we also need to make sure that if these approaches are community-centered, they are people-centered, but some decisions have to be made by the politicians. So there must be a balance between people-centric approaches and the state-centric approaches, so that we have an end to the ongoing crisis in the African continent. Thank you very
much. Thank you. I'll be brief because my colleague here spoken a bit to the question that was posed to me. The question was the convergence. Is there convergence between alternative dispute resolution versus the legal system. I'll see that as more of a complementary approach. At least from the case study I was coming from, the case of the enduring Cheke in Meru, Eastern Kenya, the question becomes, how do you build community relations in the context of addressing disputes? Because legal systems, I mean, I'm not dismissing them, but they tend to be costly, to take a very long time. So the alternative dispute resolution, as envisaged in our constitution, is supposed to sort of also help, dispense justice in a speedy way. So, but then, of course, we have to be careful that sometimes the process can lead to other things. I'll try and just be brief. Again, in terms of the case study, I would say that we need to be context specific. We cannot always, use these kind of experiences in other contexts. So we just need to be context specific as we apply some of these models. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot for all the insights. There wasn't any specific question addressed to me. I think comments are from the Reverend Father there and one you've addressed on the oppressed. I just think one thing to just chip in there, I think you have to rethink thinking. As Sabelon Dog says, lots of things we think are impossible, but those who didn't go to school are making us see that they're possible. And like we say, this can't be done, but they're doing it every day. So I think we need to revisit the education and what we have in our curriculum. On learning from the North, somebody posed that question, I think it was to Edwin. I think we can learn a lot from the North, but I also believe there's a lot we need to unlearn from the North that we are reproducing and doing every day, which is not centered to our environment. On SSRC, yeah, I really agree with you. Whoever gives the money sets the agenda. So I think it's for us to fit ourselves within that agenda, twist your study accordingly. At the end of the day, we need to make ends meet also. But some of the agenda don't really fit with the context. Some studies, some funding, you will ask yourself, why am I really doing this when nobody's going to benefit from it in Tanzania? So it's a tight spot, but asante.
Thank you, Jacinta. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, John. Thank you, Edwin. And thank you, Benezet. I think for the sake of time, I will not talk much, but maybe just to remind us the way Benezet closed off, we need to rethink thinking. We might need to rethink thinking, and in a very fundamental way. We have gone past time. We are supposed to be on the last panel, and what I'll do at this point, because the energy levels also seem to be quite low, I'll just give us a 5-minute break, and then ask that we at least to stretch and whatnot, so that we come in more invigorated and energized for our last session, the Occupied People's Forum, which is a really important discussion, especially in the context of what's happening today around the world, how it relates to this, and our experiences as a people. Okay. 5 minutes.
Sorry? Yes.